Welcome to the 14th installment of the Living History of Bill Thomson. I'm Relendra, interviewing my father, Bill Thomson, about his experiences, memories, and life. Welcome, Dad.
Hello.
Hello. All right. Well, we left off at around 1979,
Okay.
and you were in the process of talking about this guy you worked for at the Stanford Research.
Oh yeah, Rick
Yeah,
Lane. Yeah, yeah. What a case.
yeah.
He had an ego that was you couldn't fit it into a coliseum.
Okay.
And I wanted to go on sabbatical, and I wanted to go to the Bay Area,
Uh-huh.
and I wanted to go to Stanford Research Institute. And somehow I don't remember how I got this guy's name, but he had published and I wanted to get into catalysis because I
Okay.
had been in all of this fluid mechanics stuff and I knew there was no future in it.
Okay.
So I wanted to change directions. So taking a sabbatical in an area like catalysis would be a good starting point.
Okay.
So basically, I got a hold of him because I had the sabbatical, university approved, and the university only pays, I can't remember what percentage. So I asked him to make up the difference, and he did. So I went to work for him, and it was in Menlo Park, California,
Okay.
just north of Palo Alto.
And so how was that experience?
Horrible.
Yeah.
This guy, his ego was unbelievable.
Uh-huh.
but but it did get me working in catalysis, which was good.
Okay.
Uh, we I'm trying to remember some funny stories. I mean, you wouldn't believe the things this guy would say.
Uh-huh.
Uh, like somebody who would be the biggest egomaniac in the world and thought that was normal. That was him.
Okay.
So I can't even remember them. I guess I probably have dashed them out of my mind after all these years.
Uh-huh.
But but it did get me into catalysis. So I was at least successful in that way.
Okay.
And you trying to let's see who was were you born in California?
Yeah, I was born while you were in that position.
Okay. I do remember we had the earthquake and your mom
Yeah.
was pregnant with you and she didn't even notice the building shaking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah. So you went down and brought Katie and Amy down, but Paul and Leslie stayed in Moscow.
Yeah. Yes.
So
Yeah.
how did you
Well,
decide how was that decided?
well, they wanted to stay in school, so
Okay.
they needed to stay somewhere in Moscow. So Paul uh, spent the time we were only gone 6 months, I think. Paul lived with the Bowers. They lived on the corner of West C Street and I don't know the steep hill, whatever that was called,
Okay.
and they were really strange. Poor Paul, and Leslie stayed with her girlfriend who lived out in the country with parents whose parents were extremely religious.
Okay.
And so they required Leslie to go to church with them on Sunday.
Uh-huh.
And Leslie wrote us the funniest things. Uh, she would be there as if she was studying the religion, but she was writing little notes to send to your mom and I.
Okay.
And she was saying so here's so and so who everybody's praising for being this wonderful whatever the religion was,
Uh-huh.
and he's already impregnated two girls.
Uh-huh.
But Leslie wasn't surprised at all.
Yeah. So how did that affect the family, being apart like that?
Well, it was only 6 months. They came and visited once,
Hmm.
like on one of the breaks, or spring break or something. And let's see. So you would have been, were you an infant at that point? I can't. Yeah,
Yeah, I would have
and,
been just about a month old when they came
yeah.
to visit.
And so they came down and visited, and we went out to dinner a few times. But I do remember embarrassing Leslie.
Uh-huh.
So we go out to a restaurant, you know. So I asked for some water, and and the waitress wasn't happy. She preferred I would order a drink. I decided I didn't want to drink a glass of wine with dinner, and Paul and Leslie were there at dinner with us, and so I had water, but she gave me a very small glass,
Mhm.
and so I kept saying, you know, I'd like some more water, and she wasn't responding. So I got up, went over to an empty table
Uh-huh.
that had a big pitcher of water on it, and took it over to our table. And I thought Leslie was practically hiding under the table,
Uh-huh.
trying to make sure that she wasn't associated with me. Um,
Yeah. What else do you remember about that time?
you know, I don't remember a heck of a lot about it. Katie got sick. That I remember, and
Yes.
she got depressed, and due to the sickness, and we were going to this yo-yo doctor, Roger Corus and his wife. Do you remember them at all? Okay, he taught at Idaho,
Uh-huh.
and they told us about this wonderful doctor, and the guy was a total jerk.
Yeah.
And you know, finally we came out, and we said, "Oh, the doctor ordered," and we knew what meds Katie should be on.
Uh-huh.
And she says, "Oh, well, okay. Here's a prescription."
Yeah.
The doctor didn't write it at all. He just blew it off, you know.
Right.
So, it was kind of a bad experience because you know your mom always wanted to go back to a big city atmosphere,
Uh-huh.
and but she saw the downside of it too, where
Yeah.
nobody really cares about anything, you know. So so it was a good experience in that way.
Right. And then I remember Amy saying it was kind of hard on her being on her own, kind of lonely like at that time and
Yes, she was, and she went to the school. It wasn't far away. I think she was in fourth or fifth grade. I can't remember. And but she really liked the teacher, and he had a pool table in his classroom. And if you got something right, you know, you were allowed to shoot a couple of pool balls. And of course, you know, Amy was so far ahead of the kids there, and this was when California was at its most, you know, liberal. And I saw it in spades because I would take. We only had one car. Your mom was driving by this time,
uh-huh.
so I took the bus. We lived in just south of Palo Alto, Menlo Park, and I was working north of Palo Alto, so I took the bus up every morning to go to work. And the things I saw, you know, the bus would stop on the stop by Stanford at Stanford University, Stanford University,
Uh-huh.
and there was a big grade school there too. And there were kids who were like 12 years old, and it was 7:30 in the morning, and they were already stoned. I mean,
Yeah.
it was scary. You know, they were falling on their face as they got out of the bus, and so I remember your mom and I went to a excuse me, a PTA meeting
Uh-huh.
just to see what it was like. And so one of the parents said, you know, what do you think about to the, and the teacher was running it, one of the teachers. And so the parents said, what do you think about all these kids who are stoned at, you know, 8:30 in the morning? He says, well, you know, as long as they're not upsetting anything and not disturbing the class, we just let them be.
Uh-huh.
Mom and I said, oh my God, let's get out of here. And your mom never wanted to go back to California after that.
Uh-huh. Or I think I heard you say that they use the word maintaining. The kids are maintaining.
Maintain it, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was for kids who were sleeping in class
Uh-huh.
because that was good because they weren't disturbing the class.
Right.
And mostly, Amy was at the top of the class without even trying hard.
Yeah.
And so every time you got something right, she got to shoot some pool balls. So she spent basically most of the school day shooting pool.
Uh-huh.
And we said, let's get the hell out of here as soon
Uh-huh.
as we can.
And so you did get out just before you came back to Moscow was the Mount St. Helens eruption.
Yes. And let's see, Paul and Leslie decided to clean up, for it. And we found out later they were climbing up on the roof and getting the ashes off the roof. And I said, oh my God,
Uh-huh.
But they wanted the place to look nice when we got back.
Uh-huh.
And your mom, when she found that out, oh my God, she became semi hysterical.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Now that would have been the year you would have already had bought Priest Lake Cabin, because I remember reading in my mom's journals that the very first visit to Priest Lake in the summer was 1980 when I was an infant.
Yeah, yes.
And that
And
she went up with me and with Paul.
yes. And the experience, what I remember that recalls an experience, I have to go under the cabin
Uh-huh.
and to get the water on it. Oh, it was messy and horrible. And then somebody had to be down by the shore because the pump was down by the shore.
Mm-hmm.
And I lost track of you, and I happened to come up as you were making your way into the water. I don't know how old you were, but I I got there and I pulled you out of the water just as before you went under.
Yeah, that would have been a few years later because this first trip I was just 6 months old.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. You toddled all the way to the
yeah,
water.
uh-huh. So yeah, so tell me a little bit about how you came to find this cabin in Priest Lake and to purchase it
Well,
and that whole
okay.
decision.
I think your mom and I had gone up to. I can't remember the name of the resort up there at Priest Lake. Uh,
Hills.
Hills Resort.
Uh-huh.
And I guess we got into somebody babysat you guys. And your mom and I, spent a long weekend there,
Mm-hmm.
and we said, "Well, this is really neat." And so we were driving around, saying, "I wonder what places go for."
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody said, "We stopped for gas," and somebody said, "Well, there's a place for sale right down there." And so we went down. Of course, it was, if you remember, it was pretty dilapidated, but the price was right, and we could afford that.
Uh-huh.
But I wanted to get Lou Edwards to help because he wanted to go up to Priest Lake, but he liked to go on the other side of Priest Lake
Okay.
with Stan Thomas, his friend.
Uh-huh.
But he agreed to come half with me to put the down payment on, and he never used it. And I finally was able to get enough money together with the consulting that I could buy him out, and
Uh-huh.
that's how I got that place.
Yeah. So yeah, um, I guess for anybody who might want to listen to this and doesn't know much about Priest Lake or where it is or really all that much about
Yeah,
where Moscow is. We haven't really talked about that either.
yeah. Well, we didn't know much about it. Somebody told us go see Priest Lake.
Yeah.
Where's Priest Lake? Well, you had to drive up. It was close to the Canadian border,
Uh-huh.
and we went up there, and oh my God, there's no houses around.
Yeah.
This lake you could see down 20, 30 feet. It was so clear,
Yeah.
and it went on for miles. Oh my God, we just said this is a paradise.
Yeah.
And the property values can only go up with something like that.
Uh-huh.
And I don't remember where we got the money. I got a loan from somebody. Maybe it been the First Bank of Troy.
Okay.
And then Lou Edwards went half in with me,
Yeah.
but he never used it. And I finally bought him out, a year or so later. So, and so we didn't, I can't remember when we started to build a new place there. Um,
Oh, that was years later. Yeah. You built the new place at Bead Lake.
that's right. That was Bead Lake. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I finally sold it, I think, to the next door neighbors. They didn't like any neighbors to be around at all. And I sold it, of course, the price of lake values were going up. So
Mhm.
we had it, I can't remember, maybe 2 years, 3 years. And so the price went up high. So we made profit just selling it. And
Well, we had the Priest Lake place for about 12 years, 12 or 13 years.
did we have it that long?
Yeah, all through the 80s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember. But when we sold it, we never built anything on it, so, but we sold it and then we had enough money. And by that time we had discovered, Bead Lake.
Yeah.
And so we had enough money then to buy a piece of property there. And it was a rundown. Uh, I'm trying to remember what the hell was on there.
On the Bead Lake property?
On the Bead Lake property. Yeah.
But nothing. You built a house
Yeah, we
from
did build a
scratch.
house.
Yeah.
I guess it was just a piece of land. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just an empty piece of land right next to the boat
Yeah.
launch.
Yeah. That's right next to the boat. And
Yeah.
some people didn't like that because the boat launch was too close.
Uh-huh.
But when you grow up in New York City, that kind of thing doesn't bother you.
Yeah.
The people up there, their idea of nirvana was never seeing any person again.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. You got more memories about this than I do. Of course, I'm
Uh,
getting old enough now that I forget a lot of things.
right. Yeah. Well, let's see. So it's 1980. You've got the Priest Lake cabin,
Mhm.
living at the Blue House, working at University of Idaho. One thing I haven't asked you about is handball.
Oh, yeah.
Should talk
Well,
a little bit about that.
when I first went on the faculty at Idaho,
Hmm.
I was just finishing my PhD, I think.
Uh-huh.
So I'm trying to think what year that might have been, but
That'd be 69.
69.
Yeah.
And I was stressed because the thing about teaching at the university level, you don't need any experience teaching to get a job, and you don't know how to teach, right? Because you have
Yeah.
no experience. And I was pretty stressed. And I remember Lou Edwards came up to me and says, you need to get some exercise and get rid of this stress.
Hmm.
I said, okay, so well, let's, go up to the memorial gym. And I guess it was handball or racquetball. I can't remember which. But I know that's where I first learned about handball because in Gordon Boat played handball.
Uh-huh.
And so I started playing handball up there at the memorial gym. And it was right. We'd go every noon hour. There was me and Gordon and Lou Edwards and Al Wallace, who taught in the civil engineering department. So we go up and play doubles handball 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And what a saving grace that was.
Uh-huh. Let's see. So I guess another thing happening in 1980 was there's some big political changes happening. That was the year Reagan was elected.
Yeah.
What
Uh,
was your thought about what was happening
well,
on the
I do remember the year Nixon resigned, I think. That would have been just before this, right?
that was 74.
Was that okay? Well, I was teaching. Was I teaching then? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But I do remember I was teaching a seminar course
Uh-huh.
with the graduate students, and he had just announced his resignation over TV,
Yeah.
and it was like in the middle of the day, so I didn't see it. But the graduate students came in and they were all cheering and jumping up and down. I said, "What's so great?" And one of them said, "Nixon just resigned," and everybody jumped up and
Uh-huh.
clapped. Yeah, because the chemical engineers were pretty liberal.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
So yeah, what was your thoughts about what was happening socially and politically around 1980?
well, we were all pretty. I was getting more liberal all the time
Uh-huh.
when I saw what the Republicans had to offer, which was just to make more money for themselves.
Uh-huh.
And the Democrats, yeah, they didn't have any shining examples of anything really.
Yeah.
But I began to think, let's try something different.
Uh-huh.
And at one point, I even voted for somebody who ran as an independent. Uh,
Yeah, it was Anderson.
right, right,
He
right,
was the guy that ran that year, 1980.
right. That's right. That's right. So, because at that point I was not political either way,
Hmm.
but I did see what Nixon was all about,
Yeah.
and then you knew what Ronald Reagan was going to be all about.
Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah. Do you remember having any thoughts like long term about where the country was going or what the future might hold? Anything like
I
that?
don't think I was thinking that far ahead because I was
Yeah.
still so involved with learning how to teach and finishing my doctorate. It's just and your mom was never very political, so we didn't watch any of that stuff we didn't
Uh-huh.
even watch the news on TV.
Hmm.
So I didn't get to be more politicized until I got on the faculty. And guys like Lou Edwards were very liberal. In
Uh-huh.
fact, the older guy, Dwight Hoffman, he was real old, and Mel Jackson were both older, and they were pretty diehard conservative Republicans.
Uh-huh.
But even Mel Jackson, when he saw what Nixon was up to, he was saying, "Oh, save us from this."
Yeah. Okay, well, so yeah, around 1980, after I was born, so then all of the five kids are born,
Yeah,
and everyone's actually in the same house at once for a couple years.
yeah. Paul had the bedroom downstairs in what used to
Mhm.
be the pool hall, the pool
Yeah.
room, and we put a bar down there, I think, as I remember.
Hmm.
Um, Leslie slept upstairs. Yeah, well, you were a baby, so you were downstairs in a crib.
Hmm.
But and Leslie and Amy shared the up top floor. And Leslie and Amy's personalities. I mean, there was a lot of clashes. uh,
And so how were things in the family at that time?
in the family,
Yeah.
they were okay. There was no big problems. Your mom was still wanting to get out all the time, and so that's when she became friends with Marion. Is that her name, Marion?
Marion. Oh, she met Marion years later. That would
Who?
have been, she met Marion quite a bit ways later than that.
Okay. Well, maybe she didn't hang out with anybody then. Uh, and the more less she hung out, she did a lot of writing then. She used to go up into the attic, into the
Uh-huh.
ups, and just write. And years later, somewhere I've got all of her writings somewhere in the files here. When she died, I went up there and looked through it all and found a whole bunch of writings that she wrote.
Yeah.
So
Well, and then you would have been about to transfer to WSU around that time.
yeah, I'm trying to remember how that came about. I think it wasn't Gordon. I can't remember how that came about. I know how it happened. I know what happened.
Uh-huh.
No, the guy who had been department chair at
Hmm.
WSU, and he was really the department was going nowhere, but they hired two young faculty, Jim Peterson and Canona Liddell,
Hmm.
and they were getting no directions at all because the guy who was department chair was like 65 years old, and so he decided he was retiring, and so they were looking for a department chair. And after I saw what was going on at Idaho, I said, I'd like to take a whack at that and turn a department like WSU, which had a lot of financial resources that Idaho didn't have,
Yeah.
and if I could get control there and have my way, and I stated my conditions. I said I want in writing that I would be able to hire two new faculty, young
Okay.
faculty, because there was nobody there doing anything.
Yeah.
And they agreed to do that.
Okay.
And Idaho couldn't believe that I could leave.
Yeah.
And so I went over there at twice my salary,
Uh-huh.
and and with the ability to hire two new faculty. And one was Jim Peterson, and he turned out really good.
Uh-huh.
The other was Canona Liddell, and she was awful, awful teacher. Students hated her,
Yeah.
uh, but she was a woman, right?
Uh-huh.
And when it came time for tenure for the two of them,
Hmm.
so I go up there and we meet with the vice president or myself and the dean, who was Reed Miller at the time. And he looks there, and of course he wants to hire the woman because that really looks good, right?
Yeah.
And he said, why do you have Jim Peterson down here? And because he didn't have a lot of research, he was in a research field called process control, where there was no money at all because there was no process control to be done anymore.
Uh-huh.
And I was working with him. I said, you need to shift fields and get into something, which has a future.
Yeah.
And he was a good teacher. He was really trying hard to teach. And Canona was a disaster.
Uh-huh.
And so I get up there, and the vice president says, whatever he was called, he looks at it, he said, why are you recommending Jim Peterson? And I said, because I think he's got a real future. He knows how to teach. He's learning all the time. And I've talked with him about his research area, and he agrees he needs to go in something else. And I said, and I want to give him a sabbatical because he's been there long enough to go and learn a new field of research so that he can, have a career.
Uh-huh.
And she said, and then I said, to tell you the truth, if it wasn't for the fact that Canona Liddell was a woman, I wouldn't be here recommending her for a tenure. I said, I'm only doing it because I know damn well you would anyway.
Yeah.
He didn't like that very well.
Okay.
So he ended up giving both of them tenure.
Uh-huh.
And then I had to deal with Canona. And then we had a faculty member by the name of Mahalingam.
Uh-huh.
He was an Indian, high caste, and his only graduate students were low caste Indians,
Okay.
so that they would serve him at all times.
Okay.
It was a disaster when I first went over there.
Right.
There was Dick Zollis. He was the only one there who had anything going, at the time.
Yeah. Well, I remember at the dinner table every day it was Molly and Canona.
Oh yeah. Well, they became friends
Uh-huh.
because they were both worthless, so
Uh-huh.
misery loves company, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what happened finally is Mahalingam, where the hell did he go? Did he go back to India? I can't remember where he went, but it was at a place where there was going to be 4 low caste Indian slaves to be his
Oh,
graduate students, and he didn't have to teach much, which was a blessing to the students. So he decided he was moving, and he had an offer. And I said, oh, gee, I hate to see you go, Molly,
uh-huh.
tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
And then Canona decided she'd have nobody there on her side. So she got a position somewhere just because she was a woman.
Uh-huh.
And I got rid of both of them, and then I could hire 2 more faculty. And then we finally, went someplace with the department.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, so you're working now at WSU, department head, chemical
Mhm.
engineering, Washington State University.
Mhm.
And that's in Pullman, Washington, just across the border from Moscow,
But I stayed living in Moscow.
and stayed living in Moscow. Still at the Blue House up on West C Street.
Right.
And yeah, it's the 80s. Reagan's president. And then would have been 1982, I believe, that Paul graduated, or maybe 83, 82 or 83, that he graduated high school. So you had your first kid
Yeah.
leaving home, so to
Yeah.
speak. Although he stayed at the University of Idaho in town. And did he live at the
Yeah.
dorms,
He
or
did.
what did he do?
Yeah. He stayed there for graduate school.
Uh-huh.
And I probably told you this story before, but the one thing I remember that he was over there, he was a junior, and his grades, he wasn't paying any attention. He had about a 2.4, 2.5 GPA, and you know how bright he was. He could have had a 3.8 if he wanted to, but he
Uh-huh.
didn't. He was interested in other things, and so I remember he had a final exam in transport phenomena, and I had written a book on it, right,
Uh-huh.
textbook. So he comes over. He says, "Yeah, I have a final tomorrow. I was like, would it be okay if I came over to the house?" He was living, with some other students, and just you could help me with that. I said, "Sure. Yeah, bring your textbook." He brings it over. It wasn't my textbook, and he sits down and he opens the textbook, and we sit down next to him, and you could hear the binding creak.
Oh,
It had never been opened the entire semester.
yeah.
But the follow-up story to that is, and he somehow passed. And when he went to work, down in California, uh, within the first year he was down there, he gets a hold of me and he says, I'm working on something. We want to. He was working for a company that made flow meters,
Uh-huh.
and they were measuring, and this was real critical. They were measuring the oil flow from the North Slope, when it came into the U.S.
Yeah.
And three different oil companies were using the same pipeline. So
Uh-huh.
they had to be really careful about what fraction of the oil went to who. So they needed really accurate flow meters.
Uh-huh.
And one of the problems was, as the crude oil got thicker, as they got deeper into the well, the fluid behaved, and I'll use the term, you don't have to know what it means, called a non-Newtonian fluid.
Uh-huh.
But like water, for example, is a Newtonian fluid. But non-Newtonian fluids are very complicated.
Okay.
So he's trying to design a flow meter to measure these non-Newtonian fluids. So he calls me up and he said, "I've got something here. That's what I want to do. So I'm gonna send you down. Will you look over this?" So he
Hmm.
sends it down to me, the whole derivation, and it's graduate level fluid mechanics, And I'm looking at it and I said, "Oh my God." So I called him back. I said, "How did you do that?" He said, "Oh, I read the book."
Huh.
Boy, I always had my hands full with everybody.
Yeah.
You kids were all of you were so brilliant. Yeah, and everyone was different. And
Uh-huh.
trying to help, trying to, change directions to get everybody online. It was, it was quite an education for me.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Right around the time, I guess while Leslie was still in high school, she moved out. You remember that?
Yeah, well, I know the year we went to California, she moved out into the hills with Susan, her friend, who required her to go to church on Sundays.
Right, but
I
after you came back, um, when she was maybe around 16 or so, my understanding is she moved out. I can't remember if she lived in a trailer or an apartment, for a period of
lived in a,
time before she finished high school.
Paul lived in a trailer for a while.
Oh yeah?
Uh, but I think Leslie, I know, yeah, I know she was living with somebody. She was rooming with somebody. I don't know who.
Yeah. Do you remember why she moved out?
What's that?
Do you remember why she moved out?
You know Leslie, right? You think she'd like to be anywhere where other people are telling her what to do?
Okay.
She wanted to be independent.
Uh-huh.
And so that's why she moved out.
Okay.
And of course, she always did good in school.
Uh-huh.
Uh, uh, and Paul moved out too, but he did nothing
Uh-huh.
except drink a lot of beer and
Okay.
get in trouble.
Well, yeah, so how was that period of time in the early 80s? Paul and Leslie have moved out.
Oh, it gave us more time to spend with you and Katie,
Uh-huh.
and that was positive. Uh, the only thing I didn't like, let's see, how old would you have been when they moved out?
Around 2 or 3.
Okay, but that was okay. It was when you became about 6 or 7 and your mom started just leaving you alone all the time.
Yeah.
That was really bad, really bad. You became very withdrawn. You had nobody to talk to, and I don't know what you wrote things or you did drawings or something like that all day long at that little table on down from where the dining room table was,
Yeah.
you know, and I was so busy, trying to, I think I'd gone over to WSU by that point, and I'm trying to build the department, and it was awful. And I felt bad because I could see how abandoned you've been.
Yeah.
Um, Katie, she just did her own thing. She had friends and all, but you were all by yourself.
Right. Well, what do you remember about me and her when we were very little?
Uh, what I do remember is that she figured you were one of her play dolls.
Uh-huh.
And she would get it. You'd go out to the, what did we call, the big room that we had redone there?
The addition.
The addition, that's right. And she would get you and she'd pick you up and put you right where she wanted you while she did played with you supposedly.
Uh-huh.
And that's what I remembered. It was awful.
Yeah.
And you went along with it because you didn't know, you were pretty little,
Uh-huh.
you didn't know what the heck it was. And Katie, she figured it, you were really there for her to play with, to be one of her toys.
Right.
Um,
And then how was Amy doing at that time?
it's a good question. So she would have been in what grade, do you think? Well, it was pretty low grade, early grade, because
Well, in the early 80s, so this period of time, Amy's getting into high school, middle school into high school or junior high into high school.
yeah,
She was born in 69. So she would have been 15
yeah,
in 1984.
he was probably at junior high,
Hmm.
which was, yeah, and which was, what was that room? That building was just a junior high?
There was a junior high, yeah, over on the east side of
Well,
town.
like it was seventh, eighth, and ninth. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, okay. Yeah. And yeah, she was up there. And I don't remember there was nothing bad going on with her at all.
Uh-huh.
Uh, she had a couple of girlfriends. Uh, I don't recall her dating or anything like that, even when she was a freshman.
Uh-huh.
She stayed away from. She had a crush on a boy when she went to high school. And I don't remember what his name was, but and they may have gone to the movies together once or something.
Hmm.
And Leslie, I don't think she dated anybody. She viewed all the boys as jerks.
Oh,
And Paul, of course, he was just trying to fit in and mostly getting in trouble. So
yeah.
there was one incident. He took the bus, but by this time, I guess we were living out, in the new house,
Uh-huh.
and they were giving Paul a real hard time on the bus.
Yeah.
And so he got into a fight with a guy, and really, he won the fight. And the guy, the kid, told the teachers that he had beaten them up and it made it sound like Paul attacked him for no reason at all.
Okay.
And so the principal invited your mom, well, ordered your mom and I to, you know, appear with them. And your good old mom, um, finally said, "Well, what do you think about this?" And she said, "I'll tell you frankly, I'm glad he stood up for himself, and I'll bet that kid won't ever bother him again." And I said, "Yeah."
Uh-huh.
So that was the end of that one.
Yeah. Well, we're right at the closing time for our time limit here.
Okay. And
Um,
we can probably do one more
okay.
if you want.
Yeah, let's take a break and do one more.
Okay. Bye
Okay.
bye.
See you soon. Bye.